The rain in New York feels particularly heavy today, mirroring the weight I carry in my heart. I stand here at JFK Airport, gripping the handle of my suitcase so tightly that my knuckles have turned white. This single bag holds my entire life, the memories, the old photographs, and the grief I am desperate to leave behind. I am moving to a city where no one knows my name, hoping that the silence of a new beginning will finally help me forget who I used to be. Suddenly, the final boarding call echoes through the intercom, shattering my thoughts. I begin to sprint through the terminal, weaving through a sea of faces and the chaotic rush of travelers. Then, crash. I collide violently with a young man. We both hit the floor, my coffee spills everywhere, and our identical black suitcases slide across the polished tiles. In a panic, we exchange breathless apologies, grab our bags, and disappear in opposite directions. I had no way of knowing that in that split second, I had picked up a stranger's destiny. Now I am settled into my seat, staring out the window at the endless clouds. Between the earth and the sky, I feel like I am nobody, neither the Sienna of the past, nor the person I am meant to become. I rest my feet on the bag tucked under the seat, finding comfort in its familiar weight. The steady hum of the jet engines carries me toward a future I cannot see. But I know there is no turning back now. My new apartment is empty, cold, and slightly haunting. As I drop the suitcase onto the bare floor, the sound echoes through the hollow rooms. Exhaustion weighs on me, so I reach into the side pocket of the bag to find the keys to my new life. But my fingers meet a cold, heavy metal object that is definitely not my keychain. A chilling silence settles over me as the realization hits, this bag is not mine. With trembling hands, I pull the zipper of the bag. Instead of the familiar scent of my vanilla perfume, I am met with the aroma of old wood and rain-soaked earth. I don't see my floral dresses inside. Instead, there is a rugged leather jacket and a professional vintage camera. Tucked beneath them is a stack of envelopes, looking like scattered fragments of a past. I am holding a stranger's entire life in my hands, while mine is likely sitting in an unknown hotel room miles away. I turn on the camera, and its glow illuminates the dark, quiet room. I begin to scroll through the photos, each one telling a story of its own. A solitary street lamp in the fog, an empty park bench, and shadows stretching across silent hallways. Looking at these images, I feel as though I am looking into the man's soul. He sees the world exactly as I do, finding a strange, haunting beauty in the middle of loneliness. We are two strangers, but our pain speaks the same language. Beneath the leather jacket, I find a hand-bound journal. I know that reading someone's private thoughts is a boundary I shouldn't cross, but my curiosity is too strong to resist. I open the first page and read the messy, urgent handwriting. To the memories I try to outrun every single day. As I read those words, tears well up in my eyes. I don't know his name yet, but I can feel his heartbreak as if it were my own. Sitting by the window, I begin to wonder, where is he right now? Is he looking at my silk scarf? Is he holding my own diary, wondering who the girl is that writes poems to the moon in the middle of the night? We are miles apart, yet we are now connected by an invisible thread. He has become the guardian of my secrets, and I am now the keeper of his silent cries. It is 2 a.m, and I am still surrounded by his belongings. Every entry I read in his journal feels like an answer to the questions I've been asking myself. 2 strangers, an immense world, and a small accident at an airport terminal. Was it really a mistake? Or did fate always intend for our paths to cross this way? It feels as though I have known him for a lifetime. As I reach the final pages of the journal, a small card slips out and falls to the floor. The last chapter bookstore. On the back, in that same hurried ink, it says, "If you are looking for the truth, come here at sunset on Friday." Tomorrow at sunset. I have very little time to decide. I could call the airport and end this now, or I could walk toward the new path that destiny has laid out for me. The moon hung low over the city, casting long, skeletal shadows across my empty living room. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's face, or at least the version of him I had built in my mind through his photos. I wondered if he was staring at the same moon, or if he was lost in the pages of my own diary, uncovering the secrets I had buried so deeply. The silence of the apartment felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to happen. I realized then that my journey didn't end at the airport. It was only just beginning. Sunrise brought a pale, watery light that didn't feel like a new beginning. I walked through the rooms of my new life, but I felt like a ghost. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. I looked at Julian's leather jacket draped over the chair. It looked so out of place, yet so right. I reached out and touched the sleeve, the rough texture of the leather grounding me. I had to find him, not just to give him back his bag, but to find out why a stranger's pain felt so much like my own. I spent the morning neatly packing his things back into the suitcase. I folded his jacket with a care I usually reserved for my own most precious belongings. I cleaned the lens of his vintage camera, wondering what sights it would capture next. Every item felt like a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. I found myself dressing more carefully than usual, choosing a scarf that he had mentioned liking in his own indirect way through his notes. It was a strange kind of date, a meeting with a man who already knew my soul, but didn't know my name. The city felt different as I stepped out into the afternoon. The streets were crowded, but I didn't feel lost anymore. I had a destination. I followed the address on the back of the card, walking through narrow alleys and past bustling cafes. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs with every step I took. What if he didn't show up? What if the note wasn't for me? The fear of disappointment was almost as strong as the hope blooming in my chest. I found it tucked away between a bakery and an old clock shop. The last chapter. It was a small, dusty bookstore with gold lettering that had partially peeled away. The windows were filled with tall stacks of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. It looked like the kind of place where time stood still. I pushed the door open and the bell chimed, a small silver sound that seemed to echo through the silence of the shop. The air inside smelled of old paper and wood smoke. The shop was empty, save for an elderly man behind the counter who didn't even look up from his newspaper. I walked to the back, where the shadows were deeper and the shelves were taller. I checked my watch. 4 p.m. Sunset was still an hour away. I pulled a book from the shelf at random, but I couldn't focus on the words. Every time the door chimed, my breath hitched. My eyes kept darting to the entrance, searching for the man from the airport, the man whose life I had been living for the last 24 hours. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. And then it happened. The bell chimed one last time. I froze. I didn't need to turn around to know it was him. I could feel his presence, a shift in the air that made the hair on my arms stand up. I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, and slightly hesitant. He stopped a few feet behind me. The silence between us was so thick, it felt like it could shatter at any moment. "You came," he said. His voice was exactly how I imagined it. Low, slightly raspy, and filled with a quiet wonder. I finally turned around. He was holding my black suitcase, his grip tight. He looked different without the chaos of the airport terminal surrounding him. He looked vulnerable. I held up his bag, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. "I think you have something of mine," I whispered. We stood there for a long time, just looking at each other. Two people who had shared everything, without saying a word. We sat at a small wooden table in the back of the shop, the suitcases placed between us like a barrier we weren't ready to cross. He reached out and slid my diary across the table. "I shouldn't have read it," he said softly, but I couldn't stop. "You write about the world like it's a beautiful tragedy." I looked down at the leather-bound book. "And you take pictures of it like it's a lonely dream," I replied. In that moment, the bags didn't matter. The clothes, the keys, the cameras, they were just objects. The real swap had been our hearts. As the last of the light faded from the sky, Julian reached across the table and touched my hand. His skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold fear I had been carrying. "I was supposed to leave the city tonight," he admitted, his eyes searching mine. "But after reading your words, I don't think I can go back to being a stranger." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I didn't know where this story was going, but as I looked at him, I knew that the last chapter was actually just the beginning of something new. As we left the bookstore, the city felt different. The neon lights were brighter, the air was cooler, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking through a dream that wasn't mine. Julian walked beside me, his hands deep in his pockets. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence you share with someone who has already seen your soul. I realized that by swapping bags, we had bypassed all the small talk and the masks people usually wear. We knew each other's deepest fears before we even knew each other's favorite colors. We found a small, late-night diner with cracked leather booths and the smell of burnt coffee. Over plates of cold fries, we finally started to fill in the gaps. He told me about the loss of his father, the man who had given him that vintage camera. I told him about the betrayal that had sent me running from New York. Our voices were low, blending into the hum of the diner's refrigerator. Every story felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. We weren't just two strangers anymore. We were two survivors, finding a common language. Just as we were beginning to feel safe, Julian's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. It was a message from his past, the very thing he was trying to outrun. The mood shifted instantly. I saw the wall go back up in his eyes, the same walls I had seen in his lonely photographs. He looked at me, regret etched into his features. "I thought I could leave it all behind," he whispered. "But some ghosts don't stay buried." The realization hit me hard. I was terrified that this connection, as beautiful as it was fragile. I watched him struggle with his thoughts, wondering if he would choose to run again. My voiceover reflects on the nature of fear, how we spend our lives building walls to protect ourselves, only to realize those walls are what keep us lonely. I reached across the table, not to pull him back, but just to let him know I was there. We parted ways that night with a promise to meet again, but the air felt heavy with uncertainty. I went back to my apartment, which suddenly felt even emptier than before. I looked at my own diary, now returned to me, but I didn't want to read it. My own words felt like they belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if fate had brought us together just to show us what we were missing, only to take it away. Morning came with a cold, gray light. I decided I wasn't going to wait for Julian to make a choice. I went back to the last chapter bookstore, hoping to find a clue, a sign, or maybe just a sense of his presence. I spoke to the old man behind the counter. He remembered Julian, the boy who always looked for books about light and shadow. He told me that sometimes the only way to get rid of a ghost is to stop running and face it. I found Julian at the park, where he had taken some of those lonely photos. He was sitting on the same bench, his camera around his neck, but he wasn't taking pictures. I walked up to him and sat down. No words were needed. I knew he was fighting his own internal battle. "You don't have to do this alone," I said softly. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the walls crumble completely. Julian finally told me the full story. He wasn't just running from grief. He was running from a responsibility he felt he had failed. He felt he owed a debt to his past that he could never pay. We sat there for hours, talking through the guilt and the pain. I realized that my own heartbreak wasn't a reason to hide, but a reason to be stronger. We weren't two broken people. We were two people being forged in the fire. Something shifted in Julian that afternoon. He picked up his camera and looked at me through the lens. For the first time, he wasn't looking for shadows. He was looking at the way the sunlight hit my hair, the way the world looked when there was hope in it. The click of the shutter felt like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. "I'm staying," he said, and the weight of the world seemed to lift off both our shoulders. We spent the next few days rediscovering the city together. It was no longer a place of escape, it was a place of discovery. We went to the places from his photos, but this time they were filled with laughter and conversation. My voiceover talks about how a perspective can change everything. A lonely street lamp is just a light in the dark until you have someone to walk under it with. I started writing in my diary again, but the tone was different. I wasn't writing about what I had lost. I was writing about what I was finding. Julian started a new series of photographs, The Presence of Light. We realized that the airport swap wasn't a mistake at all. It was a cosmic correction, a way for two souls that were drifting apart to find their anchor. Of course, life isn't a perfect fairy tale. There were still moments of doubt, still messages from the past that tried to pull us back, but this time, we faced them together. We realized that being logical doesn't mean being without emotion. It means choosing the path that makes sense for the person you want to become, not the person you used to be. In a symbolic gesture, we went back to the airport. We stood at the same spot where we had collided. The terminal was still chaotic, still filled with rushing people, but we were still. We held our bags, our own bags this time, and looked at each other. We had our things back, but we were forever changed. The airport was no longer a place of departure. It was the place where we truly arrived. We returned to the last chapter bookstore one last time. The old man smiled as we walked in. We bought a book together, a blank journal for me and a new roll of film for him. We realized that our story didn't have to be a tragedy. It could be a mystery, a romance, or even a comedy, as long as we were the ones writing the chapters. The story ends as the sun sets over the city skyline, painting everything in gold. My final voiceover is a message to the audience. Sometimes the biggest mistakes of our lives are actually the biggest blessings. Sometimes you have to lose your bag to find your soul. And sometimes a stranger is just a friend whose heart you haven't read yet. As Julian and I walk away into the glowing light, the screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a sense of peace and the logical conclusion that love is the ultimate destination.